Hey guys, tonight we're heading down into the lush, silted floodplains of the Nile, where the air is thick with mud-sweet smells. Frogs croak like broken violins, and the night wind rustles stalks of vegetable you've probably only ever seen drowned in supermarket ranch dressing. Lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Except here, it isn't just a throwaway side salad. In ancient Egypt, lettuce is a holy thing, tied to fertility, gods, and rituals you honestly wouldn't expect from a vegetable that wilts after 2 hours in your fridge. And honestly, if you were suddenly dropped into a Bronze Age Nile village, you probably wouldn't survive the mosquitoes, the diet, or the odd way people stare at their lettuce patch as though it were a family dog. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It always makes me smile to see this sleepy little community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk along the banks of the Nile at dusk. The water gleams copper and violet. Crocodiles slide lazily back into reeds, and farmers are tending plots that look deceptively ordinary. Long green rows of lettuce, stalks stiff and upright, that don't look like the floppy leaves of Caesar salad. They stand tall, almost like little spears of green, and in the twilight you notice how the milky sap oozes when a stalk is cut. The Egyptians see that sap and immediately think of life, fertility, virility. You, meanwhile, think of that time lettuce juice stained your shirt and refused to wash out. Different priorities. One mainstream fact you hold on to: lettuce is already present in Egyptian agriculture by the Old Kingdom around 2500 BCE. Tomb inscriptions show it lined up neatly like military recruits, part of ritual offerings. It isn't an afterthought. It's a star player on the agricultural team. Some scholars even argue the Egyptians domesticated wild lettuce into the ancestor of what we eat today. And then comes a quirky tidbit. Lettuce was linked with Min, a fertility god whose statues were, let's say, very optimistic in their anatomy. Imagine walking into a temple courtyard, incense thick in the air, and seeing a priest carry a tall lettuce stalk upright in both hands. You'd struggle not to laugh, and then politely cough into your tunic. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians really believed lettuce could magically boost fertility, or whether it was more symbolic. A plant that stood tall, produced that milky sap, and looked just the right amount suggested to end up in mythology. Some think it was valued more for its seeds, pressed into oil, while others lean on the fertility angle with a knowing wink. You trudge farther into the fields, the soil damp underfoot, and you notice how carefully the rows are arranged. There's geometry here, a kind of sacred order, the same sense of design that built pyramids and aligned temples with the stars. Lettuce isn't random. It's cultivated with the same discipline you see in their architecture. The night deepens, torches flicker in the distance, and you catch the sound of water wheels creaking. Imagine lying down in that field, head on a sack of grain, fireflies dancing overhead, and the thought hitting you. Somewhere, thousands of years later, people will argue over whether you were just eating a salad or conducting fertility ritual. That's the kind of historical continuity that feels both boring and comforting, perfect for drifting towards sleep. So here you are, lying among sacred greens, the Nile breeze cooling your skin, and the awareness that in this world, even lettuce can be a bridge between humans and gods. You let out a yawn, amused at the idea that your dinner side dish once had a temple budget, and the story just keeps unfolding. You wander deeper into the Nile landscape, and the smell of damp earth clings to your sandals. Just beyond the mud brick houses, there's a space that looks suspiciously like a garden, but is far too carefully tended to be anyone's backyard. Rows of lettuce stalks stand in crisp military formation, circling the outer walls of temple. You notice priests bending carefully, plucking weeds, watering by hand, and murmuring little prayers as if each drop mattered. It isn't farming, it's devotion. Here's a mainstream fact. Many temples in Egypt, especially those dedicated to fertility gods like Min or to household deities, maintained sacred gardens. Lettuce grew in plots right beside onions, figs, and vines, but it was given pride of place. These gardens weren't just for show. They were living sanctuaries, places where divine and earthly life mixed in green silence. You hear the whisper of reeds in the breeze, and a quirkier tidbit surfaces. Some records suggest that lettuce patches were sometimes guarded not against thieves, but against stray goats. Imagine being an ancient temple guard, holding a spear, and your solemn duty is to keep one overly enthusiastic goat from munching the sacred lettuce. You'd either take your job very seriously, or you'd roll your eyes every single day. Historians still argue whether temple lettuce was considered literally divine food for gods, or simply symbolic, grown near holy grounds as a reminder of fertility and renewal. Some say priests believed the gods consumed the essence of the plant, not the leaf themselves, while others argue it was practical. Temples needed income, and sacred lettuce could be sold or offered in rituals. The debate continues, like a polite academic shouting match across centuries. You lean against a mud wall and picture the daily rhythm. At sunrise, priests pour Nile water into clay jars and trickle at the roots. By midday, they shade the stalks with woven mats to prevent scorching. At dusk, they circle the garden, chanting in low voices. You imagine them whispering, "Mammon bless this row. May Osiris grant renewal to that one." And you chuckle softly, realizing you've never once blessed a lettuce in your fridge. The temple bells ring, faint and hollow, summoning worshippers. You notice how the garden becomes part of the procession. Garlands of lettuce draped on altars, stalks carried in baskets lined with linen. You think of modern weddings where flowers hit the spotlight. Here, lettuce gets a bridal march. The air cools. Incense smoke wafts over from the temple courtyard, and you see a flicker of torchlight across the lettuce beds. Shadows make the stalks look like little soldiers, standing watch. You imagine lying down right there, the ground warm from the day's sun, and the smell of crushed green leaves rising around you. It's soothing, absurd, and oddly dignified all at once. And as you close your eyes, you can't help but smile at the quiet truth. Once upon a time, people believed the gods themselves had a taste for lettuce. You move with the priest into the garden's heart, where tall stalks of lettuce stand glistening in the moonlight. Someone slices one open, and there it is, a milky white sap that oozes slowly from the stem. You lean closer, watching it drip like resin. The Egyptians didn't just see juice. They saw life itself, a symbol of fertility, renewal, and strength. You can almost hear the whisper. The sticky fluid is not mere plant matter, but divine substance, a reminder that everything flows from life into life. Mainstream fact here. Egyptian texts clearly link lettuce with fertility gods, especially men, and the connection is made through that sap. It resembled human reproductive fluid, which to them was not embarrassing. It was sacred. Lettuce stalks were upright, strong, and productive. You get the picture. They treated this plant with reverence that made sense in their worldview, where natural forms mirror divine truths. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some folk tales hint that lettuce sap was thought to act like a natural energy drink. Imagine a tired farmer chewing on lettuce stalks not for vitamins, but because he hoped it would, shall we say, pep him up for family life. No Red Bull, no espresso, just lettuce juice under the Egyptian sun. You smile at the thought, and your modern brain wonders if it came with the same awkward side effects, like indigestion. And as always, historians still argue whether this interpretation is literal or symbolic. Did Egyptians genuinely believe lettuce's sap boosted fertility in a biological way, or was it a poetic metaphor? Some say the symbolism was enough. Others insist they noticed patterns in crops, diets, and families. The debate drifts back and forth like the Nile's tide. You trudge through the rows, imagining farmers in linen kilts, smearing sap onto their hands, maybe even saving it in small jars. The smell is earthy, faintly bitter. You glance at the stars and think how humans have always searched for signs. Looking at the sap of the lettuce the way you might stare at the foam on your morning coffee, wondering what it means. The garden hums with insects, the night still warm, and you picture the sap glistening on your fingertips. The priests handle it with ceremony, but you can't help the cheeky thought. You're basically watching ancient Egypt's version of someone obsessing over a trendy health shot. A long line of worshippers probably queued up thinking, "This is the good stuff." And as you lie down on a woven mat at the field's edge, fireflies blinking above, you feel the cool Nile breeze brush your cheek. You realize that to these people, lettuce wasn't just a vegetable. It was a living metaphor, a sacred joke the gods told with a straight face. And somehow, that makes you smile as your eyelids grow heavy. You're guided away from the temple courtyard, down a narrow dirt path lined with reeds, until you arrive at a quiet patch of cultivated ground. The stalks stand taller here, darker green, their leaves glistening in moonlight. Priests, draped in linen that rustles softly as they move, step into the rows. They carry knives of polished copper, the blades catching just enough light to gleam. And you realize this is no ordinary harvest. It's midnight. The stars are sharp and cold above, and the priests are moving with deliberate reverence, as though lettuce itself were listening. Here's your mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian ritual calendars mention night harvests, moments when crops were cut at specific lunar phases. Lettuce, being sacred, was sometimes gathered in darkness to preserve its divine potency. Ordinary farmers worked in sunlight. Priests, by contrast, slipped out when the moon was high. Then comes a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that priests whisper prayers directly to the plants before cutting, as though apologizing. Imagine standing in a row of lettuce, mumbling, "Sorry, old friend, but the gods are hungry." You can't help but chuckle at the thought of priests treating vegetables with the same solemnity modern people reserve for Nobel Prize speeches. And of course, historians still argue whether these nighttime rituals were primarily symbolic, tied to lunar cycles and fertility lore, or whether the Egyptians thought lettuce harvested by moonlight was literally more potent. Some propose it was practical. Cooler night air kept the sap from spoiling quickly. Others maintain the rituals had nothing to do with practicality at all. It was about drama, mystery, and setting the right mood for the gods. You trail behind the priests, your sandals sinking into damp earth. They move silently, bending low, slicing stalks clean, and placing them into woven baskets lined with linen. The smell is sharp green, almost peppery in the cool night air. Torches flicker faintly at the temple gate. But the fields remain hushed, only the swish of blades and the occasional sigh of wind breaking the stillness. You imagine the procession returning through the night, baskets balanced on shoulders, stalks held upright like offerings, priests stepping carefully so not a single leaf brushes the ground. The lettuce is bound for altars, for banquets, for sacred consumption. You think of it as a midnight delivery service for gods, no tip required. The stars wheel above, Orion striding over the desert horizon, and you picture yourself lying down among the rows, watching stalks sway gently. You feel the coolness of the soil against your back, the soft rustle of linen nearby, and you can almost hear the low chanting of a hymn to Min. And in this dreamy stillness, it dawns on you. In this world, even lettuce demanded respect under the eyes of heaven. You follow the priest back toward the temple gates, and there, carved into the stone lintel, is the unmistakable figure of Min, the fertility god, proud and eternal. His statues are famous for their, let's call it, bold anatomy, and in one hand he holds an upright lettuce stalk. You pause for a moment, wondering if this is the oldest sight gag in history. The priests don't laugh, of course. They bow solemnly, laying their freshly cut greens before his image, as though this pairing of god and vegetable makes perfect cosmic sense. Here's your mainstream fact. Min was one of Egypt's oldest fertility deities, worshipped in Upper Egypt as far back as the pre-dynastic period. He was always depicted standing tall, crowned with plumes, holding a flail in one hand, and more often than not, a lettuce stalk in the other. This wasn't accidental. The association between Min and lettuce was central to his cult. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some ancient hymns describe Min as he who brings forth lettuce, a phrase that probably raised fewer eyebrows in antiquity than it does now. Imagine an entire festival where priests parade through town holding giant stalks of lettuce like championship trophies. Crowds cheer, children chase after the stalk bearers, and you, as a confused time traveler, are stuck wondering how politely decline the divine salad sampler. Historians still argue whether the lettuce was meant purely as a symbol of Min's virility, or if it also represented agricultural abundance more broadly. Was it just about human fertility, or was it a kind of cosmic shorthand for everything that grows, sprouts, and reproduces in the land of Egypt? Some scholars insist Min's lettuce was linked to harvest cycles, while others keep the focus squarely on the more intimate connotations. You step closer to the statue, noticing how incense curls upward around the lettuce offerings piled high at its base. The smell of frankincense mixes oddly with the sharp, green scent of crushed leaves. It's both sacred and slightly absurd, and yet, in the flicker of torchlight, you understand why people bowed here. They weren't joking. To them, Min and his lettuce embodied the promise of renewal. Crops sprouting, families growing, dynasties continuing. The priests chant softly, their voices weaving with the hiss of oil lamps. You picture the god's stone gaze watching over them, silent and eternal, as baskets of lettuce are stacked like golden treasure. And you can't help but grin at the thought that, thousands of years later, you're lying in bed listening to a story about a fertility god with a very proud vegetable. The night grows cooler, the Nile breeze trickling through temple corridors, and you lie back against a pillar, eyelids heavy. Sacred or not, lettuce has worked its magic. It's carried you gently towards sleep, one stalk at a time. The temple quiets after the chanting, and soon you're led into a wide courtyard where low tables are being prepared. Bronze dishes glint in the lamplight. Clay jugs of beer are lined up in neat rows, and trays of bread steam gently from the ovens. And right at the center of it all, lettuce, big, sturdy stalks are laid flat beside figs, honey cakes, and roasted goose. The priests step back, and the royal party approaches, robes sweeping the floor. Pharaoh himself settles onto a carved chair, and servants pile his plate high. Here's your mainstream fact. Lettuce was a regular feature at Egyptian banquets, not only in temples but also in the royal palaces. Archaeological evidence from tomb murals and banquet scenes shows lettuce alongside bread, beer, and onions as staples of elite feasting. It wasn't garnish, it was expected. And now the quirky tidbit. Some sources suggest pharaohs preferred lettuce as a sort of starter dish, a way to balance heavier foods. Imagine being invited to an extravagant meal in gilded halls, only to find that your first bite is lettuce. Not oysters, not caviar, just crisp leaves. You picture a pharaoh chomping down with regal dignity, while everyone else at the table nods sagely, pretending lettuce is a height of sophistication. Historians still argue whether lettuce at these banquets was served for its supposed fertility symbolism or simply as a cooling, digestive-friendly food. Was Pharaoh signaling divine potency by nibbling on a stalk, or was he just trying not to get indigestion before the goose arrived? Some scholars point to ritual undertones, while others shrug and say, sometimes a salad is just a salad. You settle into a spot at the edge of the feast, listening to laughter ripple across the courtyard. Musicians pluck harps, dancers sway, and the smell of grilled meat mixes with the sharper, grassy scent of lettuce. Servants move quickly, replenishing stalks as they disappear from platters. You can almost hear one whisper, more lettuce for His Majesty. In the same tone a modern waiter might say, more champagne for the table? The night air cools, the oil lamps sway, and you picture yourself reclining on a cushion, chewing on crisp stalks while the Nile breeze drifts past. The stars glitter overhead, and you realize, here, even a banquet of kings couldn't begin without lettuce. You close your eyes, letting the clink of goblets and the soft crunch of leaves blur into background noise. It's oddly soothing, like the world's fanciest bedtime snack. The feast winds down, music fading, and you slip into the quieter back rooms of the temple, where shelves of clay jars and bundles of herbs line the walls. Here, lettuce takes on another life. Not as food for pharaohs, but as medicine for ordinary aches. A priest-physician crushes leaves of the pestle, the juice dripping into a small dish. He dips a linen strip into mixture and presses it against a burn on a worker's arm. The man exhales with relief, as if lettuce could calm fire itself. Here's your mainstream fact. Egyptian medical papyri, like the famous Eber's papyrus, include lettuce among plants used for healing. It was recommended for soothing stomach troubles, easing pain, and sometimes even as a sleep aid. You smile at the irony. People back then may have tried falling asleep after a dose of lettuce long, before you press play on this bedtime story. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest lettuce was thought to cool the body, making it handy in the desert heat. Imagine a weary farmer chewing on stalks, half believing he was lowering his internal temperature like a human clay jar of Nile water. It sounds ridiculous, but then again, people today still swear by cucumber water. Lettuce was their spa treatment, their herbal tea, their detox smoothie rolled into one. Historians still argue whether lettuce's medicinal reputation was based on actual observation. Did it genuinely soothe digestion, or was it all symbolic because of its watery sap? Some argue that the Egyptians noticed patterns of relief, while others suggest the reputation was exaggerated by temple propaganda. Scholars can't quite decide if lettuce healed bodies, or just soothed minds with ritual confidence. You trail your fingers across cool clay jars, picturing families gathering in small houses while someone mixes lettuce poultices for burns, or grinds seeds for oil believed to calm the stomach. The smell is faintly bitter, a mix of earth and crushed greens. The air is heavy, but in this moment you understand. Even in illness, lettuce was there to offer comfort. You find yourself lying down on a mat in the corner, head resting near a basket of leaves. The temple is hushed, shadows stretching long across the floor, and the faint drip of water echoes in the chamber. You close your eyes, thinking of ancient healers swearing by their sacred lettuce, and you let the image carry you toward a gentler, quieter place inside your own mind. The night stretches on, and you drift from the hushed storerooms into the mud-brick alleys of an ordinary village. Here, the mood is less solemn, more familiar. A farmer squats by a small fire, tearing into a flat round of barley bread. Beside him sits a bowl of onions, and, yes, a bunch of fresh lettuce leaves. He dips a leaf into a smear of sour goat cheese, crunches loudly, and washes it down with a gulp of cloudy beer brewed in clay jars. You realize, suddenly, this is the ancient version of grabbing a quick sandwich after work. Here's your mainstream fact. Lettuce wasn't just for temples and pharaohs. It was a staple for common folk, part of the everyday diet. It shows up in tomb paintings not only as a sacred offering, but also in baskets of food meant to represent normal meals for the afterlife. Workers ate it alongside onions, radishes, and bread, the same way you might pile up sides of picnic. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some ancient graffiti scribbled on limestone shards mentions lettuce in a joking way, hinting that people tease each other about eating too much of it. Imagine two workers bickering on a pyramid site. You ate all the lettuce again, carved forever into stone fragments. Even 3,000 years ago, people couldn't resist food jokes. Historians still argue whether lettuce was equally accessible to rich and poor, or whether there were distinct varieties. The sacred tall-stalk lettuce for temples and elites, and smaller, everyday kinds for villagers. Some argue seeds and cultivation methods differ by class, while others insist everyone crunch the same greens, no matter their rank. You sit cross-legged with the farmers, the crackle of firewood in your ears, the sharp bite of onions making your eyes water. The lettuce crunch is refreshing against the heavy bread. The beer is slightly sour, warm, and surprisingly filling. Around you, children chase each other, giggling, holding half-eaten stalks like swords. Chickens cluck, goats bleat, and the stars overhead shimmer through wisps of smoke. As you lie back on the packed earth floor of a hut, you hear the rustle of palm mats, the murmured conversations drifting off into snores. The smell of onions lingers, but so does the faint freshness of lettuce leaves tucked into clay bowls. And you smile at the simple thought. Sometimes sacred food is also just supper. The village fade behind you, and soon you're stepping into a cool stone chamber lit by flickering oil lamps. Here, walls are alive with color. Painted figures march in endless procession, bringing gifts to the afterlife. Baskets of bread, amphorae of beer, platters of fish in there, neatly arranged, stalks of lettuce painted with almost obsessive care. The green has faded into pale brown over millennia, but you can still tell the lettuce mattered enough to be immortalized on the tomb walls. Mainstream fact. Lettuce appears in numerous Egyptian tomb paintings and carvings, especially from the New Kingdom. These scenes weren't decorative. They represented eternal provisions that the deceased would enjoy in the afterlife. To include lettuce alongside bread and beer meant it was an essential food, part of both earthly sustenance and eternal ritual. Quirky tidbit. Some tombs even included real lettuce seeds or dried stalks sealed in jars, meant to sprout eternally or at least signal to gods that the deceased had good taste in vegetables. Imagine being reborn on the other side, checking your provisions and saying, "Ah yes, plenty of lettuce, I'll be fine." You grin at the idea of lettuce as the ultimate comfort food for eternity. Historians still argue whether these depictions signified actual diet or symbolic meanings. Was lettuce painted because people genuinely ate it daily, or was it chosen for fertility and rebirth symbolism? Some say it was both, nourishment for the body and metaphor for regeneration. Others suspect tomb artists simply included whatever was fashionable at the time, lettuce being the avocado toast of ancient Egypt. You run your hand across the cool wall, feeling the carved outlines of leaves, sharp and deliberate. In the corner, a priest kneels, reciting spells from the Book of the Dead. He gestures toward the painted lettuce, as if the green stalks themselves could anchor the soul in the cycle of rebirth. The chamber smells of incense and dust. You imagine lying on the stone floor, the paint faintly glowing in lamplight, shadows of lettuce stalks stretching across you. Outside, desert winds sigh against the tomb's doorway, but inside, the hush feels eternal. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize, in Egypt, even sleep was a little like lettuce, something simple, ordinary, yet sacred enough to last forever. You step out of the tomb and into the golden haze of daytime, where the hum of drums and the chatter of voices guide you toward a bustling festival. Crowds gather in the square before a temple, garlands swinging, children darting between stalls. And there, carried high on poles by priests, are bundles of lettuce stalks. The leaves sway like banners in the hot wind, and the people cheer as though green vegetables were royal treasure. Here's your mainstream fact. Egyptian festivals often included processions of sacred symbols tied to gods, and lettuce, bound to fertility deities like men, was paraded publicly during certain celebrations. It wasn't hidden in temples. It was shown off proudly, letting everyone share in its sacred aura. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest festival goers rubbed lettuce leaves on their foreheads, believing it would bless them with vitality for the year ahead. Imagine walking through the crowd, trying to look serious, while people are earnestly rubbing lettuce across their faces like some divine skincare routine. You stifle a laugh, but it's a charming image. Historians still argue whether these processions were primarily religious, direct offerings to gods, or whether they doubled as community morale boosters, showing off temple wealth and agricultural abundance. Was lettuce a divine emblem, or was it ancient Egypt's version of throwing a parade with free t-shirts? Scholars haven't agreed, and probably never will. You weave through the festival, catching the scent of grilled fish and sweet honey cakes. Musicians pound on drums, dancers twist in rhythm, and priests chant blessings over baskets of greens. Families carry home small bunches of lettuce, gifts in the temple, their children nibbling the stalks with sticky fingers. The air is noisy, alive, yet underneath it all is a steady crunch of leaves, everyone sharing in the sacred snack. As the sun lowers, you find a quiet step to sit on, watching the last procession pass. Torches flare, casting long shadows across the lettuce bundles, and voices swell into a hymn. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound blur into something soft, steady, and lulling. The thought drifts lazily through your mind. For this crowd, lettuce wasn't just food. It was a promise of renewal carried in green stalks through dusty streets. The music softens. Night drapes itself across the city, and you recline against a stone, eyelids heavy, a half-smile on your lips. Even in the clamor of a festival, lettuce has a way of pulling you gently toward rest. The festival lights fade into darkness, and you find yourself wandering through a quieter quarter of the city. The laughter of children drifts away, and instead you overhear whispered conversations in the shadows. Two women lean over a clay jar, tossing in seeds with a knowing glance. "It's for the potion," one murmurs, and you realize with a start they're talking about lettuce not as food, but as an ingredient in love charms. Mainstream fact. In Egyptian texts and later folklore, lettuce seeds were sometimes associated with fertility and desire. Beyond temple rituals, they slipped into recipes for charms, drinks, and even ointments thought to enhance attraction or ensure children. Quirky tidbit. Some suggest young lovers exchange lettuce leaves secretly, the way people might give roses or chocolates today. Imagine a bashful farmer handing over a slightly wilted lettuce leaf as his declaration of love. Not exactly Hallmark material, but in its time, it probably worked wonders. Historians still argue whether lettuce truly held magical status in daily life, or whether its reputation was mostly temple propaganda that trickled down into common gossip. Was it genuinely used in love potions, or were these just playful stories that survived because they amused scribes? Some researchers claim recipes and magical pyri point to real practice. Others shrug and say it's the ancient equivalent of pickup line folklore. You linger by the jar, watching powdered seeds mix into honey wine, then seal with a knot of palm fiber. The women giggle, whispering names, hoping the potion will turn someone's head. The air is thick with spice, sweetness, and the faint bitterness of crushed lettuce. As you step back into the night, you picture couples sneaking gifts of lettuce at twilight, or slipping seeds into a shared drink during festivals. It's absurdly sweet in a rustic way, and you can't help but smile at the idea of lettuce as the Cupid of a Nile. You stretch out on a rooftop mat, the city quiet now, stars glowing bright over the desert. Somewhere, in another courtyard, another pair is sharing their secret potion, while you let your own eyelids drift shut with the simple comfort of knowing that love and lettuce have always been tangled together in human imagination. The rooftop cools beneath you, and the silence of night carries you toward the dusty courtyards where scribes hunch over papyri. Reed pens scratch softly, and a faint lamplight flickers across their faces. On the parchment, alongside lists of taxes and hymns to gods, you see something peculiar. Drawings of lettuce stalks annotated with debates. Was it sacred? Was it medicine? Was it just the pharaoh's favorite snack? You smile because you realize, even then, people were arguing about lettuce. Here's the mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian texts don't all agree on the lettuce's meaning. In some, it's clearly linked to fertility gods. In others, it's listed in medical recipes. In still others, it appears simply as a food item wedged between onions and dates. Its role was layered, and the sources don't always match up. Quirky tidbit. One Astrakhan fragment reportedly shows a scribe doodling a lettuce stalk with exaggerated leaves, almost like a cartoon. Was he bored during his lesson? Was he mocking temple rituals? You can almost hear his teacher sigh. No more lettuce drawings in the margins, young man. It's comforting to know even sacred vegetables inspired classroom doodles. Historians still argue fiercely about lettuce's true meaning in Egypt. Was it fertility symbol, digestive aid, or simply prestige food? One camp insists its upright stalks and milky sap scream fertility. Another counters that its inclusion in healing papyri proves it was valued for calming the stomach. A third group says both sides are overthinking it. Lettuce may just have been trendy, a fashionable crop flaunted at banquets. The academic bickering stretches on, as endless as the Nile. You picture yourself standing among the scribes, listening to their voices rise and fall as they debate in candlelight. The smell of ink and papyrus mixes with sweat and dust, while outside, the croak of frogs punctuates the night. They don't know their arguments will echo thousands of years later, replayed in modern universities. To them, it's just another evening of nitpicking over sacred greens. You find a cool stone bench, stretch out, and close your eyes. The rustle of papyri and the rhythm of debate fade into a steady hum, like the sound of crickets. Somewhere between seriousness and silliness, you realize the lettuce has always been a mystery, and maybe that's the point. The scribes fade into shadows, and you drift toward the harbor at Memphis, where wooden boats creak against the current. Traders unload sacks of grain, amphorae of wine, and, tucked among them, little bundles of seeds wrapped in linen. You crouch closer, noticing they're not all the same. Some are smaller, darker, rougher than the ones you've seen in temple gardens. A merchant grins and boasts that these are foreign seeds, brought up the Nile from lands far to the east. Lettuce, it seems, had already gone global. Here's your mainstream fact. Egypt's position as a trade hub meant its crops weren't static. Lettuce varieties likely arrived from Asia and the Levant, blending with local strains to create the tall, upright forms that became sacred. Over centuries, what started as wild, bitter lettuce evolved into carefully cultivated types fit for temple rituals and dinner tables. Now the quirky tidbit. Some records hint that Egyptian traders bragged about their lettuce the way modern travelers boast about exotic coffees. This stalk? Imported. Twice as potent. You can almost hear a merchant insisting his lettuce came from a rare valley where the sun hits just right. Ancient marketing at its finest. Historians still argue whether Egypt itself domesticated lettuce into its sacred form, or whether it borrowed and refined foreign strains. Was the tall stalk with milky sap a purely Egyptian innovation, or did it evolve elsewhere and sail in with traders? The debate is ongoing, a tug-of-war across continents. You watch porters haul sacks of seeds up the dock, sweating in the hot sun. The air smells of fish, tar, and river mud. Along the quay, baskets of herbs, spices, and greens pile high, the bustle of exchange filling the air with clamor. In one corner, a priest examines a bundle of foreign lettuce seeds, nodding gravely as if deciding their divine worthiness. You sit on a coil of rope, rocking gently with the dock sway. The water laps rhythmically, boats drift lazily, and gulls wheel overhead. Around you, voices haggle. Children chase each other, and the hum of trade merges with the gentle slap of waves. In the middle of it all, lettuce seeds, tiny unassuming, are crossing borders, reshaping fields, temples, and stories. And as you lean back against a stack of cargo, eyelids heavy in the afternoon sun, you realize this humble vegetable was once a global traveler, long before passports and airports, carried on the slow heartbeat of the Nile. The harbor fades behind you, and you find yourself drawn toward the kitchen of a noble's estate. Clay ovens glow red, the air thick with smoke and spices. Cooks bustle about in linen aprons, pounding garlic with pestles, drizzling honey into bubbling pots, and, most curiously, tossing handfuls of chopped lettuce into clay stew pots. You pause, eyebrows raised. Lettuce, not as raw leaves, but cooked. Egyptians were experimenting. Mainstream fact. While lettuce was often eaten fresh, some recipes recorded on papyri and inferred from archaeological residues suggest it could be stewed or combined with other foods. Garlic, lentils, and honey were staples, and there's evidence that wealthy households enjoyed more elaborate versions of simple greens. Now for the quirky tidbit. One account hints that lettuce cooked with garlic was considered a novelty dish, something guests might be shown at a banquet to demonstrate the chef's creativity. You can almost hear someone saying, "Yes, it's lettuce stew." No, it's not supposed to taste like that. Ancient foodies existed too, apparently. Historians still argue whether these recipes were common practice or rare curiosities. Did most people actually cook lettuce, or was this just a fleeting culinary experiment of the elite? Some scholars think temple kitchens inspired these trials, while others doubt lettuce was ever truly valued as a cooked vegetable. The debate simmers on, much like the pots in the smoky room. You watch steam rising from a stew of lentils, honey, and garlic, the sharp sweetness mixing with the grassy scent of wilted lettuce. A servant ladles out a bowl for you, and you sip cautiously. The flavor is odd but soothing, earthy with a hint of sweetness. You imagine noble guests politely nodding, even if they secretly prefer plain bread. Around you, the kitchen buzzes. Knives clatter, fire crackles, and voices shout over the smoke. Yet in this small clay pot, lettuce takes on a new identity. No longer just sacred, no longer just crunchy, but something softened, reshaped by flame. You sit back against the cool wall, bowl warm in your hands. The taste lingers strangely, but the heat of food sinks into you like comfort. Outside, the Nile breeze rustles palm fronds, and the steady rhythm of life continues. You close your eyes, amused at the thought. Even 3,000 years ago, someone was saying, "You should really try this new recipe. It's lettuce but cooked." The noble's kitchen drifts away, and you find yourself back on the dusty streets, where two farmers argue cheerfully in the shade of a date palm. One clutches a fistful of onions, the other a bundle of lettuce. Their banter sounds familiar, even across millennia. The onion farmer boasts, "My crop feeds the workers who build pyramids." The lettuce grower smirks, "Mine feeds the god themselves." And just like that, you're dropped into a rivalry older than most empires. Mainstream fact. Onions and lettuce were both staples in Egyptian agriculture and diet, but their cultural roles diverged. Onions were associated with endurance and daily labor, often buried with the dead as symbols of eternity. Lettuce, meanwhile, was elevated to sacred status, connected fertility and divine rituals. Quirky tidbit. Some graffiti from workers' villages implies that onions were mocked for their smell, while lettuce was teased for its otherworldly associations. Imagine playground-style jokes. One kid reeking of onion breath, another accused of carrying around the god's vegetable. Humans haven't changed much in their humor. Historians still argue whether lettuce truly outranked onions in symbolic importance, or whether the contrast is exaggerated by modern scholars. Some point to the sheer abundance of onions in worker diets, suggesting they were more critical than lettuce. Others counter that while onions filled bellies, lettuce filled temples, and that distinction mattered more in the cosmic scheme of things. You stroll between the farmers, inhaling the sharp tang of onions, then the cleaner, grassy scent of lettuce. It's like choosing between bold spice and subtle freshness. Around you, villagers laugh at the mock rivalry, but deep down, they know both crops anchor their lives. One for labor, one for spirit. As the sun sinks lower, you find a stone wall to lean on. The farmers' voices fade into the background hum of cicadas. You close your eyes, amused at the eternal truth. Whether it's onions or lettuce, people have always argued about which food deserves more respect. And in that soft absurdity, you feel sleep tug at your mind again, as steady and inevitable as the Nile's flow. The farmer's laughter fades, and you wander into a small marketplace where amulet makers sit cross-legged, carving charms from faience and soft stone. Their fingers are steady, their eyes sharp, and what catches your gaze are tiny pendants shaped like lettuce leaves. Some are strung on linen cords, others stacked in baskets, ready for customers. A woman approaches with her child, whispers a prayer, and slips a lettuce charm over the boy's neck. She smiles faintly, as if a simple piece of green stone could ward off illness. Here's your mainstream fact. Amulets were central to Egyptian daily life. They came in countless shapes: ankhs, scarabs, eyes of Horus, and yes, plants. Lettuce amulets appear in collections today, believed to symbolize vitality, fertility, and protection against disease. To wear one was to carry the promise of renewal on your chest. Quirky tidbit. Some amulets were so small, they looked more like crumbs and charms. Imagine losing one in the corner of your house, only to have your neighbor's cat batted around like a toy. Somewhere in the sands of Egypt, tiny lettuce charms probably still lie buried under millennia of dust, waiting for some archaeologist to exclaim, "Well, that's unexpected." Historians still argue whether these charms were linked specifically to the cult of men, or they served broader health purposes. Were they fertility talismans, or everyday good luck tokens? Some say priests bless them in temple gardens, while others insist they were common market trinkets with no formal ritual. The truth, like a leaf in the wind, remains unsettled. You finger one of the amulets, cool against your skin, and imagine carrying it through a crowded city. Vendors shout, donkeys bray, and in your pocket rests the quiet assurance of lettuce's protection. You chuckle at the thought. Modern people wear bracelets for fitness or pendant for fashion. Egyptians trusted lettuce jewelry to guard their health. As the market quiets at dusk, you stretch out on a woven mat near the stalls. The smell of dust and sweet figs drift by, and the faint sound of hammers tapping stone lulls you. You close your eyes, lettuce charm still in your hand, and let the ancient hum of protection settle over you like a blanket. The marketplace fades into open desert roads, and you now march alongside a troop of soldiers heading north. Dust kicks up with every step. Bronze shields glint in the sunlight, and packs clatter with supplies. You glance into one soldier's satchel and notice something strange among the dried fish and flatbread. Bundled stalks of lettuce, shriveled but still recognizable. The soldier grins and says it keeps his belly steady and his courage sharp. You nod, though you're not sure which party believes more. Here's your mainstream fact. Evidence suggests Egyptian soldiers carried simple rations: bread, dried meat, onions, and sometimes dried vegetables. Lettuce, once dried, could be stored longer, and its seeds pressed into oil were valued both for food and ritual comfort. Military texts don't list it as often as onions, but finds from settlements hint it traveled with troops. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers thought lettuce kept them strong in battle, not because of vitamins, but because of its sacred ties to men imagined marching into war, clutching a wilted stalk like a lucky rabbit's foot. You almost want to whisper, maybe keep the shield up too, just in case. Historians still argue whether lettuce truly formed part of standard rations, or whether it was more superstition than supply. Was it practical fiber for a soldier's diets, or was it a talisman slipped into packs for luck? The line blurs, as always, between necessity and belief. You march with them, the sun heavy overhead, sandals grinding against stone. One man pulls out a stalk, gnaws a fiber stem, and hands a piece to his friend with a laugh. The crunch echoes against the desert air. oddly comforting amid the clatter of arms. That night, as fires crackle and the men sharpen spears, bundles of lettuce lie scattered among shields and sandals. You lie back, the Milky Way unfurling above, and hear faint snoring mixed with chewing sounds from those who can't resist one last bite. The desert chill seeps into your bones, but so does a sense of shared superstition, a simple green plant carried into battle as though it could tip the scales of fate. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the crunch of distant stalks lull you. In this world, even war is softened ever so slightly by lettuce. The campfires fade, and you wander back toward the fertile floodplain, where temple estates spread out like little kingdoms of their own. High mud brick walls enclose neat rows of crops, and at the center, stretching farther than you'd expect, are endless beds of lettuce. Priests in white linen stride between the rows, tallying baskets, murmuring prayers, and making notes on clay tablets. These fields aren't just gardens, they're sacred estates, entire farms dedicated to feeding rituals and funding temples. Here's your mainstream fact. Major Egyptian temples own vast tract of land, worked by laborers whose produce went directly to support religious ceremonies. Lettuce fields were no exception. Harvests of lettuce and its seeds provided not only food for offerings, but also oil pressed for lamps and ointments. Inscriptions detail how specific estates were assigned to maintain steady flows of these sacred crops. Quirky tidbit. One record hints that priests sometimes fined workers who snacked on the lettuce during harvest. Imagine being hauled before a stern temple administrator, accused of eating holy greens without permission. The poor farmer probably muttered, "But it was just one leaf." Rules were rules, even for lettuce. Historians still argue whether these lettuce estates were truly seen as divine holdings or simply practical farmland labeled as sacred. Some believe every stalk was ritually counted and consecrated, while others suggest only a portion went to temples and the rest supported the economic machine. The debate circles like vultures over the desert sky. No clear answer, just speculation. You stroll between the rows, noticing how carefully the fields are irrigated. Water channels gleam under the sun, carrying Nile water straight to the roots. The smell of damp soil rises in waves, mingled with the grassy freshness of plants. A group of laborers sings as they work, voices low and steady, the kind of rhythm that makes hours pass like minutes. By dusk, baskets of lettuce are carried toward the temple storehouses. You watch the procession, the stalks swaying, the workers' feet crunching on gravel. In the fading light, it looks almost ceremonial, though it's simply daily labor. You lie down at the edge of the field, the earth warm beneath you, crickets beginning to sing. The rows stretch endlessly, green against the orange sky, and you realize, for the Egyptians, lettuce wasn't just sacred or symbolic. It was infrastructure, the quiet fuel of rituals that held their world together. The temple fields dissolve into softer village scenes, and now you find yourself among women gathered in shaded courtyards, their chatter drifting like birdsong. In baskets beside them, lettuce leaves gleam fresh from the morning harvest. A mother breaks off a piece for her young daughter, who nibbles it shyly, while another whispers a saying you can almost translate. A woman who eats lettuce bears children as strong as a stalk. You realize lettuce wasn't just food here. It was a promise passed down in hushed voices. Here's your mainstream fact. Fertility beliefs in Egypt often extended into daily practice. Women consumed foods thought to aid conception and healthy childbirth, and lettuce, already linked to the god-men, became part of that imagined cycle. It wasn't medical science in the modern sense, but cultural conviction wrapped in ritual. Quirky tidbit. Some texts even suggest midwives encourage lettuce as part of their pregnancy diet. Picture a weary, expectant mother politely chewing yet another stalk, muttering, "If I have to eat one more salad for the baby's sake," human exasperation, it seems, is timeless. Historians still argue whether these beliefs truly influence fertility outcomes, or whether lettuce's role was purely symbolic. Did women genuinely experience health benefits, or was it a matter of faith and tradition? Some scholars propose lettuce oil carried real nutritional value, while others dismiss it as ancient placebo. You linger in the courtyard, hearing laughter ripple as women trade stories. Who conceived after eating lettuce, who swore by figs instead, who insisted the gods favored both. The air smells of baking bread and sun-warmed clay mingle with the faint green freshness of torn leaves. Children scamper past with stalks clutched like toys, their giggles echoing off the walls. As the day wanes, you settle against a cool plaster wall, lulled by the rise and fall of voices. The sound of weaving looms joins a rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. You close your eyes, soothed by the idea that even something as simple as lettuce carried hope, faith, and the promise of new life in its leaves. The courtyard laughter fades, and you find yourself walking through the somber hush of a funerary feast. Mourners sit cross-legged on reed mats, their faces painted with ash, their hands resting in their laps. In the center, clay bowls brim with beer, bread, onions, and, always, stalks of lettuce. The leaves catch the torchlight, glistening green against the dark, as if life itself has been placed among the dead. Here's your mainstream fact. Funerary banquets in Egypt often included offerings of common foods like bread and beer, but lettuce appears frequently among them. It symbolized renewal, fertility, and vitality. A gift not only for mourners to consume, but also for the departed soul embarking on the journey to the afterlife. Quirky tidbit. Some banquets ended with guests placing half-eaten stalks beside the tomb, as though leaving snacks for the deceased. You can picture an ancient mourner muttering, "Well, he always liked lettuce. Might as well send him off with some." A gesture both touching and oddly practical. Historians still argue whether lettuce at funerary feasts was meant as literal nourishment for the dead, or whether it was strictly symbolic. Fertility transmuted into rebirth for the soul. Some say the living ate the lettuce to bind themselves ritually to the departed, while others think it was a theatrical reminder that life continues in cycles. The truth, like so much in Egyptian ritual, hovers between body and spirit. You sit among the mourners, tasting the bitter beer, the soft bread, the cool crunch of lettuce. The air is heavy with incense and grief, but also with a strange kind of calm. Children doze against their mother's shoulders, the Nile breeze slipping through open doorways, carrying away the smoke. Later, you follow the group to the tomb itself. Offerings are laid out, stalks of lettuce propped neatly beside jars of beer and stacks of bread. The priest chants, his voice steady and low, promising the soul nourishment in eternity. You step back, watching torchlight ripple across carved walls, and you feel the hush deepen, an eternal banquet where lettuce plays its quiet part. You lean against the stone, eyelids heavy, lulled by the chant, the rustle of leaves and baskets, the soft crunch of offerings being placed. It's almost like a lullaby, carrying you gently towards sleep. The tomb quiets, and when you open your eyes again, you're standing on a bustling quay where Greek ships have docked. Sailors unload amphorae of wine, jars of oil, and, curiously, bundles of lettuce stalks. Egyptian priests gesture proudly, explaining to curious foreigners why their green vegetable is no ordinary salad. The Greeks tilt their heads, half amused, half intrigued, scribbling notes to carry home. You realize you're witnessing lettuce lore leaving Egypt, drifting toward new shores. Here's your mainstream fact. During the late Pharaonic and early Hellenistic periods, Egyptian religious practices influenced Greek culture. Lettuce, sacred to men, began appearing in Greek rituals and texts, though often with altered meanings. Cross-cultural exchange carried not just goods, but ideas, vegetables included. Quirky tidbit. Some Greeks adopted lettuce but flipped its symbolism. While Egyptians tied it to fertility and virility, Greeks sometimes saw it as a funerary plant, linked to the withering of desire. Imagine a Greek guest hearing the Egyptian boast, "This makes you strong," while muttering, "Funny it makes us sleepy." Cross-cultural misunderstandings, wrapped in lettuce leaves. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly misunderstood Egyptian symbolism, or whether they deliberately reinterpreted it to suit their own myths. Was it a lost-in-translation moment, or a conscious cultural remix? Some scholars lean on linguistic evidence. Others insist symbolism naturally shifts between worlds. You sit on a coiled rope, listening to sailors barter. Egyptian traders boast of lettuce oil pressed from seeds, claiming it's fit for gods. Greek philosophers nod politely, already plotting how to spin the story in their next symposium. The air smells of salt and tar, mingle with the sharp green of freshly cut leaves drying in the sun. As the ships depart, sails catching the wind, You watch bundles of lettuce vanish over the horizon. The Nile sacred plant is on its way to new temples, new feasts, and new debates. You lean back, the creak of ropes and the slap of water rocking you like a cradle. And you realize, in that moment, lettuce had become a traveler, carrying pieces of Egypt so far beyond its own desert sky. The ships drift into memory, and now you find yourself reclining in a Roman villa centuries later. The walls are painted with bright frescoes of gardens. Servants bustle with trays of olives and bread. At the far end of the triclinium, a host lifts a platter piled high with lettuce. But this isn't Egypt anymore. Here, the leaves are served not as sacred emblems, but as a sleepy appetizer. Romans, with their flair for rebranding, have decided lettuce is nature's cure for indigestion. Here's your mainstream fact. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder and Cato the Elder praised lettuce as a cooling food, good for digestion, and even helpful for sleep. It was eaten at the start of banquets, or as a final light dish to settle the stomach. What Egypt treated as virility, Rome reimagined as tranquil restraint. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans even believed too much lettuce could make you sluggish, a joke passed around in taverns. Imagine a group of toga-clad diners poking fun at a friend. Careful, eat another leaf and you'll be snoring before dessert. The humor was mild, but it shows how the lettuce had shifted from passion to drowsiness. Historians still argue whether this Roman reinterpretation came from genuine medical observation or simply from cultural borrowing gone sideways. Did they really notice digestive benefits, or did they just misunderstand Egyptian symbolism and run with it? Some suggest it was both, a mix of experiment and miscommunication, like history's strangest game of telephone. You recline on a cushioned bench, sipping watered wine, while a servant sets a dish of dressed lettuce before you. The oil glistens, the leaves smell faintly bitter, and after a few bites, you do feel strangely calmer. Around you, conversation hums, senators trading gossip, poets reciting lines, and you realize the lettuce is no longer a divine symbol, but a dinner table mood setter. The evening wanes, torches flicker, and the air grows heavy with warmth and wine. You lie back, full and drowsy, amused by the thought that in Rome, lettuce wasn't the spark of life. It was a gentle curtain call at the end of the feast. The Roman villa fades, and you find yourself in a library where Greek and Roman scrolls lie side by side with older Egyptian papyri. Scholars sit cross-legged, arguing in low but animated voices, waving stalks of dried lettuce like props in a philosophical debate. One insists the Egyptians revered lettuce as a symbol of fertility. Another claims it was clearly a funerary plant, while a third insists it simply helps the stomach. You can't help but smirk. This is ancient academia at its most salad-focused. Here's your mainstream fact. Cross-cultural transmission often led to reinterpretations. Egyptians tied lettuce to men and fertility. Greeks linked it to funerary practices. Romans to digestion and sleep. As the plant traveled, its meanings multiplied, sometimes clashing, sometimes blending. Now the quirky tidbit. One Roman writer joked that philosophers should argue less and eat more lettuce to cool their tempers. Picture a heated symposium where someone interrupts with, "Gentlemen, please, have some lettuce before you faint from passion." It's history's gentlest mic drop. Historians still argue whether Greeks genuinely misunderstood Egyptian lettuce symbolism, or whether they deliberately reframed it to fit their worldview. Was it lost in translation or conscious rebranding? Some suggest Egyptian priests played up different aspects for foreign visitors, tailoring the meaning like a salesman adjusting his pitch. Others argue foreigners simply saw what they wanted. You watch the scholars scribble onto scrolls, ink staining their fingers. One records lettuce as a divine aphrodisiac, another calls it sleep aid, and yet another scrawls furiously about funerary rituals. Centuries later, archaeologists will piece these fragments together and wonder why no one could agree. The air smells of papyrus and lamp oil, warm and faintly smoky. You lean against a stack of scrolls, lulled by the rhythm of debate, voices rising and falling like waves. Outside, the desert night deepens, stars glimmering coldly above. And as your eyelids droop, you realize lettuce has always been both more and less than itself, shifting in meaning like a leaf carried by the wind of cultures. The library murmurs fade, and suddenly you're wandering through the streets of Thebes during the reign of a later dynasty. The temples still stand, but their grandeur feels quieter, worn. In the markets, baskets overflow with onions, garlic, and cucumbers, while lettuce now sits off to the side. Still sold, still eaten, but no longer carried in parades or guarded in sacred gardens. It has slipped from divine emblem to everyday produce, a vegetable among vegetables. Here's your mainstream fact. By the late period of Egyptian history, lettuce gradually lost its prominence as a sacred plant. Inscriptions and ritual references became rarer. And while it remained part of the diet, it no longer commanded the same temple devotion. Ritual importance had shifted to other offerings, and lettuce was demoted to the ordinary. Quirky tidbit. Travelers from other regions sometimes joked about Egypt's former lettuce worship. Imagine a visiting merchant smirking. These people used the bowl before salad, while munching on his bread and cheese. Even in antiquity, cultural memory had a way of becoming parody. Historians still argue whether the decline in lettuce's sanctity was gradual disinterest or deliberate replacement. Did priests decide to phase it out, or did common people simply stop believing in its divine power? Some claim changing dynasties brought new gods and symbols. Others think lettuce's sacredness was always fragile, destined to fade once practical use outweighed symbolism. You walk through the market stalls, listening to vendors hawk their wares. Children tug at their mothers' robes, pointing at honey cakes instead of the lettuce pile. A farmer leans lazily against his cart, chewing a stalk without reverence, spitting the stem into the dust. The sun beats down, hot and relentless. You find a shaded corner, resting against a mud wall, the sound of barter and laughter all around. The smell is no longer incense and ritual smoke. It's sweat, bread, and the sharp green of fresh-cut leaves. You close your eyes, and for the first time, lettuce feels less like a god's emblem and more like what it is today. A simple, crunchy green, fading back into the background of daily life. The marketplace hum fades, and you drift forward in time, into the cloisters of a medieval monastery far from the Nile. Monks bend over manuscripts, sketching plants into herbal compendiums. Between drawings of sage, mint, and fennel, you spot a curious entry, lettuce. It's described not as divine, but as a mild medicinal herb, good for cooling the body and calming the restless. The sacred aura of mint is gone. Instead, lettuce has become a sleepy footnote in European herb lore. Here's your mainstream fact. During the medieval period, lettuce appeared in herbal manuscripts across Europe and the Middle East. It was categorized as a cooling plant recommended for fevers, indigestion, and even insomnia. Physicians of the time believed balance of the body's humors could be restored by such greens. Quirky tidbit. One medieval recipe advised mixing lettuce juice with wine as a cure for overexcitement. Picture a weary monk scribbling. If Brother Thomas will not stop singing at Compline, give him lettuce wine. Somewhere in a monastery cellar, sleepy monks probably swore by this concoction. Historians still argue whether these medieval uses were direct descendants of Egyptian traditions or rediscoveries through trade and text. Did knowledge travel through Arabic scholars translating ancient papyri, or did lettuce's medicinal uses arise independently? The scholarly debate remains unresolved, layered like the leaves of the plant itself. You enter the scriptorium, the smell of ink and candle wax heavy in the air. Monks hum under their breath, their quills scratching softly across vellum. In the corner, a novice drowses over a bowl of boiled greens, proving lettuce's sedative reputation firsthand. Outside, the monastery gardens stretch in tidy rows, cabbages, herbs, and of course lettuce, growing humbly in the cool soil. You lie down on a wooden bench, the cloister bells tolling in the distance, and the image of sacred Egyptian procession seems almost absurd compared to this sleepy vegetable patch. Still, you smile at the continuity. Thousands of years after Min's temple, lettuce remains companion, no longer divine, but still trusted to soothe, to cool, to settle restless minds. And in the hush of the cloister, you feel your own mind quieting, lulled into drowsy calm. The monastery cloisters dissolve, and suddenly you're back in the wide sunlight of the Nile Delta, but not in the age of pharaohs. Centuries have passed, dynasties have risen and fallen, and now the fields belong to ordinary farmers whose lives look more like your grandparents than like a page from a myth. Rows of lettuce still spread across damp furrows, tended with the same careful irrigation, yet no priest arrives to bless them. These are just crops now, traded in markets, piled in baskets, eaten at family tables. The gods, it seems, have moved on. Here's your mainstream fact. Modern Egypt still cultivates lettuce, particularly varieties resembling those ancient stalks. The sacred associations are long gone, but the continuity of agriculture across millennia is remarkable. Seeds adapted in antiquity remain part of the landscape, unbroken despite the tides of conquest and change. Quirky tidbit. In some rural villages, old sayings linger. Grandparents mutter proverbs about lettuce bringing coolness to the heart or freshness to the blood. They might not know the connection to men, but the echoes of sacred meaning still whisper in everyday speech. Imagine a child rolling their eyes at grandma's insistence. Eat your lettuce. It will bless your bones. Historians still argue whether modern strains directly descend from the temple fields, or whether they've been crossbred so thoroughly that only faint traces remain. Archaeobotanists point to similarities in seed size and growth, but others warn against romanticizing continuity. The truth is tangled, like roots in damp soil. You wander along the furrows, watching farmers lean on wooden hoes, sweat glistening on their foreheads. Children chase each other between the rows, trampling leaves, earning scoldings from mothers bent over baskets. A donkey brays, pulling a cart stacked with greens bound for the market. The air smells of wet earth manure and the crisp freshness of newly cut stalks. As the sun sets, the fields glow green against the golden sky. You lie down at the edge of the irrigation canal, listening to frogs croak and water trickle. The stars begin to emerge, and you feel a calm realization. While the sacred is faded, the lettuce endures, faithful and ordinary, feeding lives day after day. Its divinity has slipped away, but its quiet usefulness has never left. The modern fields shimmer into dusk, and you find yourself peering into a trench where archaeologists kneel with brushes and trowels. The desert wind stirs dust into golden veils as they carefully uncover a sealed jar. The lid cracks open, and inside, cushioned in ancient straw, lie shriveled seeds, tiny, unassuming, yet once destined to sprout in sacred soil. You lean closer, marveling at how something so small could carry centuries of symbolism. Here's your mainstream fact. Excavations in Egypt have uncovered preserved seeds, including lettuce, stored in jars placed within tombs or granaries. These finds reveal both agricultural practices and the symbolic importance of ensuring crops accompany the dead into eternity. The survival of seeds across millennia offers a rare glimpse into diets and rituals frozen in time. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes archaeologists test whether ancient seeds could still sprout. Most fail, of course, but a few experiments with other crops have succeeded. Imagine the anticipation. Planting a 3,000-year-old lettuce seed, watering it carefully, and then squinting at the soil for weeks, only to get weeds. Somewhere, a researcher probably muttered, well, the gods clearly kept that one for themselves. Historians still argue whether these jars of seeds were meant for practical sustenance in the afterlife or as symbolic tokens of renewal. Did Egyptians believe the dead would actually sow crops in the next world, or was the presence of seeds enough to guarantee rebirth? The line between practicality and magic blurs, as it so often does. You kneel beside the trench, listening to the brush strokes on pottery, the soft murmurs of scholars comparing notes. The desert air is dry, buzzing with heat, but the jar's interior still smells faintly earthy, as though the past itself has been sealed inside. As the sun sets beyond the dunes, you imagine lying among the dig site's scattered tents, the flap of canvas in the breeze and the hiss of sand against your ears. Somewhere nearby, a crate holds ancient lettuce seeds, patiently waiting to be studied. You smile at the quiet thought. Even the tiniest fragments of a once sacred vegetable can whisper across time, carrying the memory of fields, rituals, and gods long gone. The excavation site softens into polished floors and glass cases, and suddenly you're strolling through a museum. Fluorescent lights hum quietly overhead, their cold glow bouncing off relics arranged neatly for display. Behind the glass, you spot a carved amulet shaped like a lettuce stalk, its edges worn smooth by centuries of handling. Nearby, a painted fragment from a tomb shows green stalks rising proudly beside baskets of bread. Visitors shuffle past, glance briefly, and move on, Another odd artifact in a long line of curiosities. Here's your mainstream fact. Museums around the world house artifacts of lettuce symbolism, carved charms, tomb paintings, even dried plant remains. These pieces illustrate how integral the humble green once was to Egyptian ritual and daily life, though most visitors give them less attention than the towering statues or glittering jewelry. Quirky tidbit. A few display placards have been called amusingly vague, describing lettuce simply as ritual plant of uncertain importance. Imagine traveling thousands of miles to see Egypt's wonders and being told, in essence, this was sacred salad. Please don't touch. You grin, because even curators sometimes shrug at history's mysteries. Historians still argue how best to present such objects. Should lettuce amulets sit beside fertility figurines or in agricultural exhibits? Do they belong with medicine, diet, or religion? The debate is ongoing as museum staff juggle both scholarly accuracy and visitor attention spans. You linger at the case, your reflection hovering ghost-like over the ancient green carved into stone. Families wander by, children pressing noses to glass, adults snapping quick photos before hurrying toward the mummies. You imagine whispering to them, "This little leaf once carried the weight of gods." The air smells faintly of polished wood and old paper from the gift shop. You sit on a bench nearby, letting the low murmur of footsteps blend with the buzz of lights. The amulet glints softly behind its protective shield, silent but stubborn in its presence. You close your eyes, lulled by the quiet hum of the gallery, and think how strange it is. What was once carried in sacred parades now rests behind glass, watched by yawning tourists. Yet, in that sleepy space, the lettuce still keeps its dignity, a green echo from a world that once bowed before it. The glass cases fade into the echo of lecture halls, and suddenly you're seated among rows of students, notebooks open, while a professor paces at the front. On the blackboard, chalk squeaks out the word lactuca. He waves his arms, declaring lettuce both sacred and mundane, while half the class stifles yawns. One student doodles leaves in the margin, another scribbles fertility with 3 question marks. You realize the debate hasn't ended. It's just moved into modern classrooms. Here's your mainstream fact. Modern Egyptologists and historians still can't agree on the lettuce's definitive role. Some emphasize its fertility symbolism tied to men, others highlight its medicinal references in papyri, and a few stress its everyday dietary role. It remains one of those deceptively simple topics that produce endless papers. Quirky tidbit. One conference paper was jokingly titled "The Cult of Salad," poking fun at how scholars can argue for hours over lettuce, while pyramids and mummies sit patiently in the background. Imagine a room full of experts sipping coffee, passionately defending their stance on a vegetable. The ancient priests would probably shake their heads. Historians still argue fiercely about whether modern interpretations exaggerate lettuce's importance. Was it genuinely central to ritual life, or are we projecting significance onto a leafy green because it appears often in paintings? Some scholars argue it was minor compared to staples like wheat, while others insist its symbolic weight made it indispensable. The quarrel, like lettuce itself, seems never-ending. You lean back in the lecture chair, listening to the cadence of debate. Chalk dust floats lazily in the sunbeams slanting through high windows, and the room hums with whispered notes and the scratch of pens. It feels strangely soothing, like being lulled to sleep by academic bickering. As the professor concludes, students shuffle out, still muttering. You linger, gazing at the empty chalkboard, the faint outline of lettuce stalks sketched in white. You chuckle softly, realizing that across thousands of years, people are still fussing over a plant most of us now drown in salad dressing. And somehow, that persistence makes the lettuce's story even more quietly powerful. The lecture hall dissolves into twilight, and you find yourself back at the Nile's edge. The river flows slowly, its surface gleaming bronze as the sun dips behind the desert hills. Fields of lettuce stretch out before you, rows swaying gently in the evening breeze. No priests, no farmers, no scholars, just a quiet rustle of leaves, like a lullaby carried through time. You walk between the stalks, brushing your fingers against their cool leaves, and feel centuries collapse into a single moment of calm. Here's your mainstream fact. Lettuce has endured across cultures not just as food, but as a vessel for meaning. Sacred in Egypt, reinterpreted by Greeks and Romans, woven into medieval herbals and cultivated into modern kitchens. Its history is as layered as its leaves. Quirky tidbit. Somewhere in Egypt today, a farmer might harvest lettuce with no thought of men, no whisper of fertility, just the simple hope of a good price at market. And yet, unknowingly, he continues a chain stretching back 5,000 years. It's humbling and a little funny that the God's sacred plant has become the common lettuce wrap. Historians still argue over how much weight we should give to lettuce in the grand scheme of history. Was a minor green exaggerated by symbolism, or a vital thread in Egypt's ritual and daily life? The debates continue, voices rising in academic journals like echoes of priests chanting in temple courtyards. You lie down at the field's edge, the earth cool beneath you, stars prickling one by one into the darkening sky. The river sighs, frogs croak softly, and the leaves around you rustle like pages of an endless book. You close your eyes, and in the gentle rhythm of wind and water, you hear the long memory of a plant that was once sacred, now ordinary, always present. And now, a soft wind down for you. Let the images blur, the green rose fading into gentle waves, the chants of priests dissolving into cricket song, the solemn rituals softening into the hum of night. Picture yourself floating on the Nile, the boat rocking lazily, the stars overhead guiding you deeper into rest. Each breath is slower, heavier, as if your body is laying down roots in cool soil. The world narrows to the sound of water and the hush of leaves brushing in the breeze. Even history, with all its debates and noise, grows quiet here. The lettuce fields fade into darkness. The night folds over you like linen cloth, and you feel safe, steady, and utterly calm. Let yourself drift, carried on the same timeless river that has always flowed, into sleep.